Hi, everybody. This is more the management of reality on our weekly English live podcast. And today we're going to talk about the so-called peace process, the Oslo peace process, or the Oslo Accords. What what
Hmm.
what is this? Why did this happen? Most people have no idea what the Oslo Accords are, or how they got us into this mess. And I'm always talking about the Oslo peace process. So we thought it would be a good idea to give you like a brief historical overview so that people know what the background is, and they can have it handy anytime they need to. So I have a few slides here for everybody to see. And let's see. Let's get right into it. You can see that, right? Okay.
Yes.
So what we got right there is this. This is the famous photograph of. Let me just project it. So this is the famous photograph that captures the handshake between the Israeli prime minister and mass murderer Yasser Arafat in 1993. Okay, this the man on the right hand side of your screen is was a mass murderer, Yasser Arafat. He was a terrorist who specialized in the killing of men, women, and children of Jewish descent, preferably Israelis. But he also murdered people from other countries in his efforts to bring, international attention to the Palestinian movement. Blah blah blah. So he thought it was a good idea to kill innocent people, and that's what he did. He was a terrorist. Um, and what this handshake in 1993 means, this happened on the lawn, on the White House lawn, and this is the beginning of the Oslo Accords. So obviously there was a negotiation period before 1993, but what happens in 1993 is that Israel on the one hand and Yasser Arafat's organization on the other hand signed an agreement. Yasser Arafat's organization is PLO Fatah. So let me write that on the screen for you, so that people won't forget. So this is PLO Fatah. Okay. Now
Hmm.
the PLO was a terrorist organization, or rather a federation, a confederation of terrorist organizations that was created in Egypt in 1964 is when the PLO is created. It means Palestine Liberation Organization. And it was created by Gamal Abdel Nasser, at the time the dictator of Egypt. Okay. Now, Al Fatah was a different organization, but and that was Yasser Arafat's organization. But Al Fatah took over the PLO around 1968. So that's why I always call it PLO Fatah, because the guys making the decisions are always the Fatah people. So Fatah is the controlling organ of the PLO. Okay, so in 1993, what happened is that PLO Fatah signs an agreement with Israel in which they promise to stop killing innocent Jews in exchange for Israel allowing PLO Fatah to come in to this territory, these territories here. Okay, so what is shown in red in the map is Judea and Samaria, which is usually called the West Bank in the media and in academia. They call this the West Bank. Now, the West Bank is not a real name. It was invented after 1960, after the after the War of 1948. So in 1949, this term West Bank was invented, and all it means is that, see, on the border between Jordan and Israel, you have the Jordan River here, right on the border. So this area here got called the West Bank of the River Jordan. You see, that's what West Bank means. It's not a real name. The real names of these places are Judea and Samaria. Those are the names they've had for thousands of years. West Bank is just an invented name so that enemies of Israel can say something that is not Judea. You see, because Judea means the land of the Jews. Anyway, let us say the most neutral description of what happened in the Oslo process is that the terrorist organization PLO Fatah was brought in to be the government over the Arabs in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Okay, and that was ostensibly in exchange for PLO Fatah no longer murdering innocent innocent Israeli Jews. Okay, so they committed to stopping their terrorism. That's what they were giving, and what Israel was giving is it was allowing them to come in to govern the Arabs in Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, and a process was begun to give PLO Fatah more and more power within Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to move the diplomatic process by stages in the direction of establishing an independent Arab Palestinian state in those territories. That was the idea. And this was supposed to bring peace to the Middle East. It was supposed to bring peace between Arab Palestinians and Jews, because the Arab Palestinians would finally get the state that supposedly they wanted, and the Jews would get peace. It would stop the terrorism against Jews. And the other promise that was made is that this was going to bring regional peace. In other words, the Arab countries were supposedly very upset about the fact that the Arab Palestinians didn't have their own state. And so by initiating the Oslo peace process, letting PLO Fatah come into Israel, into the disputed territories, and starting this process to move everything towards a Palestinian, independent Palestinian state, that was supposedly going to satisfy all of these Arab countries, Arab Muslim countries that were very upset, supposedly, about the fact that the Arab Palestinians didn't have their state. Okay, that was the promise.
Francisco, I have
Yeah,
a question here.
sure.
Because to my understanding, before the Accords, there were already living Arabs in those areas, right?
Yes. So there had been Arabs living in this area, in the entire area of what we call the State of Israel, including the disputed territories. There were Arabs living there. There were also Jews living there. So this is the original land of the Jews. The Jews were dispossessed of their land about 2,000 years ago by the Romans, and then later by the Muslims. But the Jews never left. There were always Jews living here, even though they suffered genocide. Many Jews stayed there and repopulated. And in fact, in the 19th century, the city of Jerusalem, before the Zionist movement began, the Zionist movement is the movement that was inaugurated to create a Jewish state, right? That's what Zionism means. Zionism is the return to Zion. Zion is an ancient name for the land of Israel, because there was a city there that was called Zion. And anyway, there were always Jews there, and even before the Zionist movement began, the movement, the nationalist Jewish movement to create a Jewish state, right? Even before that began, in the middle of the 19th century, the British consulate in Jerusalem was writing that Muslims in Jerusalem were only like 25% of the city. So the overwhelming majority of the inhabitants of Jerusalem already in the mid 19th century, before the Zionist movement began, okay, there was an overwhelming majority of Jews in Jerusalem, right? So there were lots of Jews here. There were
Okay,
Arabs and there were Jews. The Arabs, Muslims who lived there were living there as a consequence of the Muslim genocidal conquest of these lands, and they had been living there for generations, and the Jews had been living there for thousands of years. So
Okay,
now,
so my question is, Francisco,
yeah.
what happened, because the Arabs were already here, the Jews and the Arabs in Judea and Samaria. What's the difference after the Accords? Like you said that they bring.
Okay, so I'm going to get to that. Let me get to that. Let me get to
Okay.
that, and if I don't explain that, you can come back with your question. Okay, so next, what I want to show you is what was there, okay, before the creation of the State of Israel, so that we can understand what the Oslo process was supposedly about. Okay, so this is the land that was originally promised to the Jewish people when the British Mandate of Palestine was created. The British Mandate of Palestine was created immediately after World War I. So World War I goes from 1914 to 1918. In 1917, the Ottoman Empire lost these lands to the British. Okay, the Ottoman Empire was fighting on the side of the German empires. So World War I is a war between the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is a German empire, and the German Empire of the Hohenzollern dynasty, right? The Reich, the German Reich. Those two empires together fought against Russia, France, Great Britain, and the United States. Italy was on the side of the German empires at the beginning, and then it switched sides. Okay, so it's towards the end of this war in 1917, the British managed to take these lands from the Ottoman Empire. Okay, so all of what we call the Levant, which is this area of Syria and what is now Israel and Jordan and all of this stuff, it all falls into British hands in 1917. After the war, which ends in 1918, there was this discussion about who should rule this land that had belonged to the Ottomans. Okay, and what was decided at the League of Nations was that the British would control this land that we see on the screen, the British Mandate of Palestine, on condition that the Brits would work to create there a Jewish homeland. Okay, that was the agreement at the League of Nations, which is the precursor of the United Nations. So the British got control of this by agreement with the League of Nations on condition that the British would work to create a Jewish homeland there. Okay, so this is the land that was promised to the Jews. Now, immediately after the British Mandate was created in 1920, this is what happened. The British government violated the terms of the agreement with the League of Nations unilaterally and arbitrarily. So as soon as they got the British Mandate of Palestine in 1920, what they did was they broke it up into two territories without asking anybody. This is something that Churchill did, by the way. He was the one responsible, and he separated, as you can see, 3/4 of the land that had been promised to the Jews and created an Arab state. So the British behaved as though their responsibility was to create an Arab state rather than a Jewish state. And they did that right away. Right away, they removed 3/4 of the land promised to the Jews to create an Arab Palestinian state that they called Transjordan. And then it became called the Kingdom of Jordan. Okay? But they did this right away. Immediately, they created an Arab Palestinian state. Still, no Jewish state had been created. The other thing that the British did is they forbade entrance of Jews to what they called Transjordan. Okay, so no Jews could settle there. Meanwhile, Arabs could continue to settle in what remained for the Jews, which was still called Palestine, which is 1/4 of the territory that you can see on the left-hand side or on the western side of the map. Okay, that's still called Palestine. Why did they continue to call Palestine the territory on the west? Because Palestine was the name that had been chosen for the land that was promised to the Jews. Okay, this is very important. The name Palestine was identified with the homeland of the Jews, not the Arabs. Palestine meant the home for the Jews. Palestine was a name that had not been used in the Ottoman Empire. There was no province named Palestine. They didn't have an administrative structure or frontier or zone called Palestine. None of that. Okay, this is a term that was imposed by the British. The Ottomans didn't say Palestine. No population, no local population called itself Palestinian. There was no such thing. It was the British who gave this name Palestine to this area, reviving an old Roman name for this area, okay, which the Romans had invented after genocide of the ancient Jews when they conquered this land and took it away from the Jews, right? So the Romans had invented the name Palestine, so they didn't have to say that this was the land of the Jews. And then the British, paradoxically, revived this name for the land that had been promised to the Jews. So in the modern world, the only people who would call themselves Palestinians in the first half of the 20th century were the Zionist Jews. They would say, we are the Palestinians. Why? Because international law was saying that the British mandate of Palestine was for a Jewish homeland. So that's how the Zionist Jews talked. They said, we are the Palestinians. And the journal of the Jews in British mandate Palestine, they had a newspaper, and that newspaper was called the Palestine Post. Okay. Now, back to this map. So the 1/4 of the original mandate that remained was still called Palestine because that was the land that was still being promised to the Jews. Okay, but the settlement of Arabs from other places, Arabs and Muslims from other places, in the land promised to the Jews was not really forbidden. And in fact, there was a lot of immigration, an enormous amount of Arab and Muslim immigration into the remaining 1/4, what we could call rump Palestine, because the Zionist Jews created an economic boom there, and it attracted many Arabs who were in search of a better life. So there was a lot of Arab immigration, and in fact, a lot of illegal Arab immigration that the British tolerated. And most of the people who call themselves Palestinians are descended from those immigrants, actually, the overwhelming majority. So that's an important thing to understand. Now, the next thing that happened, I should say, during this period of the mandate, there were giant terrorist attacks against innocent Jews organized by what we might call the Arab-Palestinian movement, okay? But in 1947, after the World War and after the murder of the European Jews in what we call the Shoah, or the Holocaust, the German Nazi final solution, the United Nations, which is the successor organization to the League of Nations, proposed in 1947 that what remained of Palestine be partitioned into 2 states. Okay? So the proposal in 1947 was, let's create another Arab Palestinian state in the land promised to the Jews. So we already gave 3/4 of the land promised to the Jews to create one Arab Palestinian state, which is the Kingdom of Jordan. They said, well, now let's create another Arab Palestinian state from the land promised to the Jews. And that's the land that you see drawn or painted in, I guess this would be pink, or violet, all right? That's what was proposed for a second Arab Palestinian state in 1947. And for a Jewish state, uh, the land in orange was proposed. Okay, so the best beaches and the best arable land was given to the Arab Palestinians for a second Arab Palestinian state, and the Jews got mostly desert and swampland. This is what was proposed. The Zionist Jews said, okay, fine, we will take it, so long as they give us something. They were only getting, notice, 1/8 of the land originally promised to them. And the Arabs were getting 7/8 because a second Arab Palestinian state was being proposed. The Jews said, fine, we will take it. And the Arabs said, no, we won't. Speaking for the Arabs was Haj Amin al-Husseini, okay? So this is a plug for my book, which is only in Spanish. The second edition is coming out very soon. And on the cover of my book is Haj Amin al-Husseini, because he's the main character, he's the main protagonist of that book. It's a book about the Arab-Palestinian movement and its relationship with the Nazis. I'll say a few words about that in a second. But the point is that Haj Amin al-Husseini, he was the unelected dictator of the Arab-Palestinian movement. And he was the one organizing all of those terrorist attacks during the time of the British Mandate of Palestine period. And during the war, I mean, the reason you see him shaking hands in this photograph with the top Nazis is that during World War II, Husseini went to Germany, where he was received with the honors of a head of state because he was a very famous anti-Semite. In fact, the fourth huge terrorist attack that Husseini organized against the Jews in British Mandate Palestine, called the Arab Revolt, that was organized with weapons that Adolf Hitler sent Husseini, okay? Both Mussolini and Hitler had sent him weapons for that huge terrorist war, which lasted actually from 1936 to 1939. And then after that, Husseini went to Iraq, where he organized the big massacre of the Jews in Baghdad called the Farhud. And then he ended up in Berlin, where he was received, as I said, as a head of state, you know, with the honors of a head of state. He was very famous, very well respected by anti-Semites everywhere. The Nazis were very fond of him. They thought he was very important, and he was very influential in the entire Muslim world. Many people thought he might be the next caliph, you know, and so the Nazis thought he would be very useful, and he was. They immediately gave him a bureaucracy, Bureau des Gros Mufti, it was called, which he used to organize entire divisions of the SS for Heinrich Himmler that participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Holocaust. But the worst thing he did is that he became best friends with Adolf Eichmann, and together they administered the entire death camp system. Now, very few people know this. Very few people know that Haj Amin al-Husseini, the founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement, is also the butcher, the Nazi butcher of the European Jews, on the same level with Adolf Eichmann, the recognized director of the death camp system. Okay, so that's Haj Amin al-Husseini. He rejected, so he escaped justice after the war. He remained the leader, the unelected dictator of the Arab-Palestinian movement. So speaking for the Palestinians, when the partition plan was proposed in 1947, Husseini said, no, we reject any state for the Arab Palestinians if it means that the Jews will get something, okay? They said, if the Jews are offered anything and if they accept, we will go to war. And his protege, his best friend and protege, Azam Pasha, who was Secretary General of the Arab League, this guy, Azam Pasha, in public announced that if the Jews accepted anything from the UN, then the Muslims of the world would launch a war of extermination. That is, quote unquote, the phrase he used. He said, war of extermination. He said the entire Muslim world would join together to commit genocide against the Jews of British Mandate Palestine if they made any effort to become a Jewish state. And when the Jews accepted the offer from the UN, Haj Amin al-Husseini's soldiers in British Mandate Palestine, the Arab Palestinians, they kept their promises and they started a terrorist war against the Jews, which was meant to exterminate them. And then when David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, declared the Jewish state, 1 minute after the British Mandate Palestine, the British Mandate of Palestine ended, the minute Ben-Gurion declared the Jewish state, then a coalition of Arab states invaded to support the Arab Palestinian effort to exterminate the Israeli Jews. That's what we call the War of 1948. So what is very important to understand about this period is that the Arab Palestinians said no to the Arab Palestinian state that was proposed in 1947. And they also said out loud that what they wanted to do was to exterminate the Israeli Jews, and they tried to do it. They tried to do it. They lost the war, but if they had won, the Israeli Jews would have been exterminated by this combined Muslim attack against the Israeli Jews. All right, why is this story so important? It's important because the story that people are sold on everywhere in the media and in academia is this false story that is told with these 4 maps. This is completely false. What they tell you in the left-hand map is that in 1946, this was the definition of Palestine. But what they never tell you is that, in fact, originally, Palestine had been this. You see? So they want to sell you on the idea that the Jews came to the Middle East to dispossess the Arab Palestinians of their land. You see? But what they never tell you is that in the Ottoman period, there had been no Palestine. There had been no Palestinians. And that this place was only called Palestine when the British arbitrarily baptized completely arbitrary borders as Palestine. So there were no Arab Palestinians before the British drew these borders in the Middle East. So if you want to say that the Arab Palestinians exist, well, you have to say they exist starting in 1920 when the British created the British Mandate of Palestine. Before that, there are no Arab Palestinians. But if after the British creation of the British Mandate, we do have Arab Palestinians, well, then we also have Jewish Palestinians, right? Because there were Jews living there. So they're all Palestinians. The Arabs are Palestinians and the Jews are Palestinians. But then what we have is that immediately after this, there was an Arab Palestinian state created, and that's the Kingdom of Jordan. So they already have an Arab Palestinian state starting in 1922, more or less. And then a second Arab Palestinian state was created, which they rejected. They preferred to exterminate the Israeli Jews. So the entire idea that the Arab Palestinians were denied a state by the Zionist Jews is a complete farce. The truth is that the Jews were dispossessed of 7/8 of the territory that had been promised to them for a state. And those 7/8 were then given to the Arab Palestinians, although, of course, they rejected the second Arab Palestinian state. So they didn't end up getting that because they lost the war of 1948, okay? So this map on the left is a lie because it is telling you that somehow this was Palestine and the Jewish settlements, which are drawn in white, were somehow encroaching on an ancestral Palestine, which in fact never existed. All right, the second map is showing you the proposal for the partition of Palestine in 1947. Okay, so this map is real. It is the real borders of the UN partition proposal, but it is lying to you by saying that Palestine was here reduced to what you see in green. No, sir. What happened here is the two states were proposed, one for the Arab Palestinians, one for the Jewish Palestinians, but all of it had been rump Palestine, all of it. And the Jews were also Palestinians, right? They're all Palestinians. Two Palestinian states were proposed, one for the Jews, which was called Israel, and then one for the Arabs, which they said they didn't want because what they really wanted was to stop the Jews from having anything. And so they were going to exterminate the Jews. That's what they said. They lost the war. And because they lost the war, what happened was that after 1949, the Jews ended up controlling everything you see in white, okay, which of course they have a right to because they won those territories defending from a genocidal enemy. And so that land is theirs now. I always put this in personal terms so that people can understand it. If somebody pulls a gun in my face to kill me, and I'm fast enough to take that gun from their hands, and I am now in possession of that gun, they can't say to me, hey, give the gun back, it's my property. No, sir. You pull that gun in my face with intent to kill. I took it from you. That's my gun now. And any court in the world that says you must give that gun back because it's this guy's property, that's an absurd court. That's an absurd court. That's not a moral court. That's not an ethical court. That's not a liberal court. That's a totalitarian genocidal court. And we should have nothing to do with any kind of legal system that says that I have to give the gun back to the original owner who pulled it in my face with intent to kill. No, sir. If I take that gun from him, that's my gun now. And this is what happened here. The Arab states and the Arab Palestinians attempted genocide against the Jews from these territories, and the Jews, defending themselves, managed to win the war. So all of the territories they captured are now rightfully theirs. Okay? And what the third map is saying, however, is that the territories that remained outside of Jewish control are somehow Palestine. No, sir. Those territories ended up illegally controlled by Jordan and Egypt. So Jordan ended up controlling this territory here. And this is what the media started calling the West Bank, even though the real names are Judea and Samaria of these territories. Judea down on the south, Samaria in the north. And so Jordan ended up controlling Judea and Samaria, and Egypt ended up controlling Gaza over here, okay? But that's not Palestine. This is Judea and Samaria, and this is Gaza. Why is it not Palestine? Well, because it had been Palestine, but when it was offered to the Arab Palestinians for their own state, they said, we don't want it. So Haj Amin al-Husseini's rejection of the Arab Palestinian state offered in 1947 means that these territories have an indeterminate status, okay? Because who legally owns them? Who knows? Nobody, okay? Certainly, they didn't belong to Jordan. Jordan was illegally occupying these territories after trying to exterminate the Israeli Jews. So they clearly have no legal right to them, because attempting to exterminate another people does not create a legal claim to a piece of territory, obviously. So neither Jordan nor Egypt had a legal claim to these territories. Now, in 1967, there was another attempt to exterminate the Israeli Jews, led by Egypt and the Arab League. Jordan again participated, and it used these territories as a launch pad to try to exterminate the Jews in 1967. Egypt used Gaza as a launch pad, partly. But the Arabs lost again, and this time Israel ended up controlling both Gaza and Judea and Samaria at the end of another attempt to exterminate the Israeli Jews. So after that war, the rightful owner of both Judea, Samaria, and Gaza is the state of Israel, because once again they tried to exterminate the Jews, and they ended up gaining those territories in a defensive war. Okay, so these four maps are just lying to you. Now, the only map that kind of tells the truth is the last map, because what that map is showing you is the areas under Arab-Palestinian control after the Oslo process. Okay, so after the Oslo process, it is finally true that the Arab Palestinians have partial sovereignty over some of these territories. Okay, that's what the last map is showing. But it's important to recognize that this last map, what they're showing you is the Palestine created by the state of Israel. The state of Israel is the only one to ever create a state of Palestine, or a partial state of Palestine. Okay, it's a gift of the Israeli Jews to the Arab Palestinians, because they were under no obligation to do this, none. And still they allowed PLO Fatah into the state of Israel, because what was being promised to the Israeli Jews is that this was going to produce peace. But it is not true that letting PLO, the terrorist organization PLO Fatah, into the territories of Judea and Samaria and Gaza was a form of doing justice. That's completely false. These people didn't deserve this. Okay, they were a terrorist organization that had been killing innocent Jewish families, and in no shape or form was letting them inside to govern the Arabs in the disputed territories a way of doing justice to anyone. First of all, the PLO Fatah didn't deserve to come in here because they were a terrorist organization killing ordinary Jewish families, number one. Number two, the Arab Palestinians didn't deserve this because PLO Fatah has always been an imposition on the Arab Palestinians, and they have always oppressed and killed them. And finally, the Israeli Jews didn't deserve this because PLO Fatah, the minute they were brought into the disputed territories of Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, they began killing Jewish families even more. So the terrorism against Israeli Jews quintupled after these people were allowed in. So this is what the Oslo so-called peace process really is. It's an attack on both Arab Palestinians and Israeli Jews, because PLO Fatah specializes in killing both Arab Palestinians and Israeli Jews. Now let me show you something else. I need to stop sharing my screen, or at least this screen. Hold on. I need to share this other screen here. And what we're showing here is my English language article on Haj Amin al-Husseini, founding father of the Arab Palestinian movement and also top leader of the German Nazi final solution, which most people don't know. And you can read here all about that. But we also have this other article, which is about the relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran, okay, and jihadi Iran. That's Yasser Arafat and Ayatollah Khomeini celebrating the Iranian Revolution right after it happened. Okay, so in Iran, there was a revolution in 1979 that installed the jihadi terrorists in power. The leader of those jihadi terrorists is this guy, Ayatollah Khomeini. And it was Arafat who put him in power because PLO Fatah in the 1970s in Lebanon, where they had a kind of a state within a state in Lebanon in the 70s, they trained Ayatollah Khomeini's guerrillas and armed them to the teeth, right? And those are the guerrillas that put Khomeini in power. So Khomeini was very grateful. He invited Yasser Arafat to celebrate all of this, and with him in Tehran. And then PLO Fatah helped Khomeini create his terrorist institutions. Okay, so this is amazing. This is what the Oslo process really is. The Oslo process, because what creating Khomeini and the jihadi terrorist Iranian regime demonstrates is that the genocidal ideology of the Nazis, which PLO Fatah inherits from Haj Amin al-Husseini, in addition to the terrorist ideology that they inherit from Muslim jihadism, right? Because they have both, right? That ideology was alive and well in 1979 when PLO Fatah helped create jihadi Iran. So we should expect that PLO Fatah never abandoned its goal of exterminating the Israeli Jews. Why would we think that? They created jihadi Iran, okay? So it's very important to understand all of this context when we're thinking about the Oslo peace process. Now, I don't want to forget, we have a couple of we have all kinds of resources in this article for you about Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Nazis. There's a link to my book, but we also have, I think it's up here. Let me see. Oh yeah, right here. We have an English language documentary. Okay, so if, in our YouTube English language channel, we have this documentary, which is, we can't see the thumbnail for some reason. I don't know why we can't see that. But what this documentary covers is the entire history of the Arab-Palestinian movement and how it got involved with the murder of the European Jews. We're going to put the links to all this in the description, down in the description. So look for it there. And also remember to give us a like and to subscribe while you're looking for these things, because that helps us a lot. So in this documentary, it's a very short documentary, just 15 minutes. You get the whole picture of what the relationship between the Arab-Palestinian movement and the Nazi final solution was. And we also have this other documentary on the relationship between PLO Fatah and, I believe it's right here. This is the documentary on the relationship between PLO Fatah and jihadi Iran, okay, and Ayatollah Khomeini's jihadi revolution. So, and that's also 15 minutes. It's very short. It gives you the whole context. Anyway, people always ask me, well, but why would the United States want to bring people who want to kill the Jews into the Jewish state? And the short explanation, the short answer to that is in this other article that we have for you in our Substack, which is called How Many Nazis Were Secretly Recruited at the Creation of the CIA. What we do there is we document for you what Christopher Simpson documented in 1988, okay, which is that the CIA, which is where the Oslo process was invented, was created by absorbing the Nazi intelligence infrastructure, okay? Fremde Heer Ost, which was Adolf Hitler's intelligence system for his foreign armies east, okay, for the entire push into the Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. That entire intelligence infrastructure was absorbed by the US at the end of the war to create the CIA. So the CIA is basically a group of Nazi collaborators and Nazis, including many officers and agents of the SS, which is the organization directly responsible for the final solution. Okay, so these are the Nazis. The CIA is the German Nazis, and those are the people that created the Oslo process. So that's perfectly consistent with what the Oslo process actually is. Now, the last thing I want to tell people about the Oslo process, and I'll shut up so that you can ask me questions and maybe somebody in the audience has a question, is that None of this was explained to the public when the Oslo process was invented in the early 1990s. Okay, nobody was told that the Arab Palestinian movement, and in particular PLO Fatah, was descended from Haj Amin al-Husseini's German Nazi final solution. Nobody was told that. Nobody. Um, it was a kind of secret in the sense that no major media discussed this. It wasn't discussed in the universities. The information about this was in all of the libraries. That's where I found it when I started investigating the Arab Palestinian movement in the early 2000s. But it just wasn't part of the, let us say, public discussion when the Oslo process was invented. It still really isn't. So how is that possible? Well, that's possible because the media and academic system is controlled. This is what we call the management of reality. The media academic system is controlled by the same intelligence structures that were created after World War II. So these same Nazis that are that are the CIA, those guys ended up controlling the entire media and academic space. So they can make someone disappear, from public discourse, and that's what they did with Haj Amin al-Husseini. In 1967, they were still talking in public about Haj Amin al-Husseini. There's a book by this guy Shechtman, published in 1967. But after that, after al-Fatah became the PLO in 1968, nobody ever mentioned Haj Amin al-Husseini, the founder of al-Fatah, ever again. Nobody mentioned it. Neither in the big media nor in the academic world. The same thing happened to PLO Fatah's relationship with the jihadi terrorists in Iran. Okay, the relationship was explained on the front page of the New York Times in 1979. We document that for our readers in our article about this. And you guys can go read the original New York Times article if you want. So it was common knowledge in 1979. I mean, the front page of the New York Times. Okay, it's about as public as you can get. But a few years after that, everybody ceased talking about how PLO Fatah had created Ayatollah Khomeini. Nobody discussed it again. About three years after it happened, nobody was talking about it again. And neither in the big media nor in academia. And they even started pretending that somehow PLO Fatah and Iran were enemies, which was a total lie. So by the time that we get to the beginning of the Oslo process in the early 1990s, everybody had forgotten about the relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran. Of course, not the intelligence agencies. They knew. But the public had forgotten. So when the diplomatic process to create the PLO Accord, the Oslo Accords with the PLO was begun, the public didn't know. Now, everything I have said is very dramatic, explosive. Of course, it's the reason that I was fired from the University of Pennsylvania. If people don't know this, I'll summarize it very briefly. I was hired as a ethnic conflict specialist at the University of Pennsylvania in the year, what was it? In the year 2000, I believe it was. And I was hired at a think tank created by the psychology and political science departments that was called the Solomon Asch Center for Study of Ethno-Political Conflict. It was a think tank that was focused mostly on the Arab-Israeli conflict and especially on the Oslo process. Okay, so if anybody should have heard about the relationship between the Palestinian movement and the German Nazis, or the relationship between the Palestinian movement and the jihadi terrorists in Iran, it should have been me, because I was an internationally known ethnic conflict specialist working at an Ivy League university. These are supposed to be the best universities in the world, in a think tank dedicated to studying the Oslo peace process. And yet nobody in this academic space where I was working had ever mentioned to me Haj Amin al-Husseini or the relationship between PLO and the Iranians. None of this was ever discussed. And we had conferences going on all the time, and we had experts in residence. The director, Ian Lustig, the director of the Ash Center, was a specialist on the peace process and on the Oslo peace process, and nobody ever discussed any of this. So I never learned any of this from being in that space. So if I wasn't hearing about it, it means nobody was hearing about it. Okay, that's a diagnostic fact. How did I learn of this? Well, I became interested in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict as a result of being in that academic space. And I began studying it on my own. And in 2 weeks of researching the history of the Arab-Palestinian movement, I found out everything I just said right now. It was all in the library. It was all on the internet. It's just that if you don't know that you need to go look for this, if you don't have any suspicions that you might, that the people responsible for creating meaning and managing our reality have been lying to you, right? If you have no such suspicions, then you feel no need to go investigate skeptically the history of the Arab-Palestinian movement, right? So, wait, I'm getting to a point. So what happened when we get to the 1990s, early 1990s, nobody knows any of this. And perhaps what is most dramatic is that in the Israeli Knesset, the vote to approve Oslo in 1995 had a margin of 1 vote in favor. What do I mean by this? I mean that if one of the votes in favor had been switched to a vote against, just 1 vote, Oslo would not have been approved. And then none of what Oslo produced would have happened, because all of the problems, all of the security, very deep security problems of the Jewish state, which led to October 7th and all of the damage that we have seen in the last 2 years, all of that is a consequence of bringing the terrorists into the state of Israel, okay? It's all a consequence of that. So, and there are 2 very dramatic facts here. One is the Israeli vote in the Knesset, which demonstrates that if the Israeli Jews had been informed of the relationship between PLO-Fatah and the German Nazi final solution, and or the relationship of PLO-Fatah with the Iranian jihadists who promised to repeat the Nazi final solution in Israel, right? Either of those would have caused the Oslo process to fail. So it was very important to keep everybody in the dark about this. That's one thing I want to communicate. The other thing I want to communicate is that I forgot what the other thing was. I thought it was going to come back to me. So ask me your question.
No, my question was, when you were investigating all the history of Israel and you find all this information that you shared with us today in just 2 weeks. My question was like, because there are many books that are written that are programmed for you to believe all the opposite, right? With all the maps and all the history, the other history.
No, but they tell you a false history.
Okay, but how do you know that? Because you are investigating, there are 2 histories for let's say. How did you know this was the real one that you are sharing with us today and it's not the other one? Because there are 2 books. You could have grabbed this one or the other one, right? Like,
well, the only way to know what's true is to go investigate the documentation for yourself. That's the only way to know. I mean, people cannot know that what I'm saying is true by listening to me. I could be lying to them. I could be making stuff up, Or somebody could have lied to me and I might be repeating those lies. You never know. There's no way for you to know. So you have to go look at my footnotes and look at the documentation for yourself and see whether I'm telling you the truth. Now, what are the key facts to document to make sure that you verified? Well, one is our Palestinian rejection of the offer of a state in 1947. Okay, two things there. One is that in fact an Arab Palestinian state was already created in 1922. That's the Kingdom of Jordan, right? That's one thing. And then a second Arab Palestinian state was proposed in 1947, and the Arabs said they didn't want it and they preferred to exterminate the Israeli Jews. So go verify that that's the truth, because I'm claiming all of that is true. So I have footnotes in my article, and you can go check the footnotes and go look at the original documentation and make sure that I told you the truth about all of that, because that is a very important part of it. So the pro-Arab narrative claims that the Arab Palestinians were dispossessed. Well, how do you dispossess a people when you give them 7/8 of the territory that they were claiming was theirs? So you give them 7/8 of the territory and you dispossess them? How is that coherent? And if they rejected the second offer of territory, they rejected it, how is it justice to give them that territory or part of that territory when, one, they rejected it, two, they launched a war of extermination against the Jews, and then after that, they created a terrorist movement to go on killing Jews? How is it justice to give those people anything, right? So if it is true that one Arab Palestinian state was created right away on the land promised to the Jews, Kingdom of Jordan, if it is true that the Arab Palestinians rejected the second state that was offered to them, and if it is true that they created an Arab terrorist movement to kill Jews after that, all of that is enough to say they have no right to anything. If in addition, these are the people who helped the Nazis murder the European Jews, right? The founding father of that movement helped the German Nazis murder the European Jews. Forget it. Now, the thought experiment that you need to do with people, I think maybe this is the best place to start if people are having a discussion with people who identify as pro-Palestinian or pro-Hamas, right? The first thing you can ask them before you get into the historical documentation, right? You can ask them, hey, let's do a thought experiment. Would it be justice, historical justice, to give Judea Samaria and Gaza to the German Nazis, to the people who organized the final solution in Europe? Would it be justice to give them Judea Samaria and Gaza? Everybody's going to have to say no. You cannot get... One of the things I didn't mention yet, but I'm going to mention it right now, is that if you look at our what I'm showing on the screen right now, on the article that traces, not this one over here, the article that traces the relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran, right? Let me find it for you here. Well, I don't know if it's here, but I'm not sure what I was going to say. I think I'm developing early Alzheimer. What was I saying? Bring me back, Yoel.
You were talking about this thought experiment in an argument with a pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas person.
Exactly. So thank you. So the other thing that wasn't said to people was this relationship between PLO Fatah and Iran. And the important thing, whether you're talking about the relationship between the Nazis and, oh, I think this was in the footnotes. That's why I can't find it. Hold on. It's right here in the footnotes, I think. Let me see. It's the map that the Pentagon made to show what is a militarily strategic territory of the state of Israel. Oh, I don't think I have it here. I don't think I have it there. Maybe it's here. No. Oh, I'm going to put it in there. So in immediately after the war of 1967, the Pentagon created the Pentagon. I do have it. I just remembered where it is. The Pentagon studied what would be the militarily strategic. So what would be the borders of Israel that allow Israel to survive? Okay, what are the minimum borders that Israel needs to survive? And what they determined, I mean, I'm not going to find it now, because when you're trying to find something on the blackboard or in the middle of a live podcast, you can't find it because your IQ is cut in half and you can't do two things at once. So I'm not going to find it. But the point is, the Pentagon determined that Judea Samaria and Gaza were included in the territories that the state of Israel absolutely had to keep if it was going to survive. Okay, so obviously you can't give a reward to people who you can't reward people who want to exterminate the Jews with territory inside the Jewish state. That's insane, right? But even more insane is to give them militarily strategic territory, because what that guarantees is that these people will be in the ideal position to fulfill their mission to exterminate the Israeli Jews, right? But that's what the Oslo process did. The Oslo process, organized by the Nazis at the CIA, gave the people who want to exterminate the Israeli Jews militarily strategic territory of the Jewish state, which was created, the Jewish state was created to protect the Jews from the exterminators. Okay? So this is how crazy the Oslo process is. The Oslo process gave a militarily strategic piece of the Jewish state created to protect the Jews from the exterminators to the exterminators. And then all of history was rewritten for the public so that people think that the Arab Palestinians were dispossessed and it is justice to give these exterminators land of the Jewish state. It's insane. Okay? So those are all the reasons that make it clear that if the Israeli Jews had known in the early 90s when the Oslo process was proposed, if they had known all of this, the vote in the Knesset would have never succeeded in approving the Oslo process. Impossible. Moshe Feiglin, who was organizing against the Oslo process, and Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, that was agitating against the Oslo process, they would have won. They would have stopped it if everybody had known this. And in fact, it was Arutz Sheva that published my article in the early 2000s on the history of the PLO, showing that they were coming out of the German Nazi final solution. They're the ones who published it in Israel. And the fact that they published that article of mine caused me to be fired from the University of Pennsylvania, which demonstrates that the media academic system was making sure that nobody knew about this, okay? Because I was in a privileged position. I was in a think tank focused on the peace process in an Ivy League university. So if people heard me, an internationally known expert on ethnic conflict, saying this from the University of Pennsylvania, forget it. That was a huge megaphone. They couldn't afford anything like that, so they fired me. And when they fired me, they told me explicitly that even though my documentation was impeccable, they couldn't let me say this because it was going to hurt the peace process. That's what they said. They actually said that to me. Yeah.
Who said that to you?
The people, my superiors at the university, the people who fired me, because they started threatening me. You know, they threatened me. They said, you can't say this or you're going to lose your job. And I said, what are you talking about? Why can't I say this? This is an ethnic conflict. You hired me to study ethnic conflict. I'm doing my job. What's the problem? If I made a mistake, tell me where the mistake is. And they said, no, your documentation is impeccable, but you can't say this because this would hurt the Oslo process. I'm like, what? Let's hurt the Oslo process. Who cares? We have to say the truth.
Wow.
So yeah. So my experience is actual data. It's not anecdotal, simply anecdotal. It's structural because of the position I occupied and because of how dramatic it is for a university in the United States to take the risk of firing a professor merely for documenting a historical fact, thus violating his academic freedom and also the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Okay? They took a big risk, which means this was very important to them. It was very important to them. And it also means that they didn't think it was that big a risk because they felt relatively confident that the media academic system was going to protect them. And it did. It did protect them. There was one interview with Fox News that people can go look up online, where Fox News interviewed a very young Francisco Gil White, and because they thought they could destroy me, but the interview didn't go the way they wanted, and I ended up embarrassing them, and so they cut the interview. After it was going to be a 30-minute interview, and after 5 minutes, it was going so badly for them that they interrupted with music and they said the interview's over and they took me off the air before I could even say goodbye. They got scared. And then other interviews that because people were I had several interviews lined up, and after that one, it was all frozen. Nobody ever called me back. So yeah, the media protected the University of Pennsylvania. There was also an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer to attack me, not to attack the University of Pennsylvania, to attack me. So they were right to think that the media academic system was going to protect them. It did. It did. But so again, the strategy that I recommend for people to use when they start talking about, of course, you can use this video, but before you show this video to anyone or the documentaries we're going to share with you in the description, or the articles or anything else, do this thought experiment with people. Do it. The first thing you do before saying anything is this. Suppose that the Oslo process had been invented to give the German Nazis Judea, Samaria, and Gaza. Would that be justice? They're going to say no. So once they say no, you know you have an agreement on basic principle with the person you are speaking to. And that's very important. Then ask them this. If the Oslo process had given Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to the Iranian jihadi terrorists, would that be justice? They will say no. I mean, if they say yes, you know the conversation's over. You're speaking to a monster. There's no reason to continue. But if they say yes and they agree with you on the basic principle that would not be justice, you say, okay, now let me share with you some historical facts. And you explain that PLO Fatah, the organization they did give Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to, is directly descended from the German Nazi final solution because Haj Amin al-Husseini was a top leader of the genocide against the European Jews. And then you show them that PLO Fatah created jihadi Iran. And then you say, look, this is what they did. They gave Judea, Samaria, and Gaza to the German Nazis and to jihadi Iran. And you just told me that wouldn't be justice. Now tell me that this is what you want to defend. You see? I think that's the most strategic order. Get people to agree first on the principle, and then you show them the historical facts. That's it's a very powerful sequence.
Yes. And then encourage them to look it and to investigate it.
Of course, because they're going to be very skeptical that those historical facts that you're sharing with them are true, And then you say, look, I'm not asking you to believe me. I'll show you the documentation, and then you tell me what you think. And then you let them go see it. Don't. There's no need to press too much, because people always react. They defend. They don't want to believe it. They already have an ideology, etc. So don't push. Just tell them, look, this is what I believe is true. Francisco Gil White has the documentation. Go read it. If you find any problem with the documentation, I'll be interested to know. That's the kind of spiel you can give them. And then you tell them, I think the facts speak for themselves, but if you think otherwise, I want to hear back. Go look at the documentaries. Go look at the footnotes in Francisco's articles. Go read his book. He has a whole book on this, full of footnotes that you can go check. Right? So that's it. And by the way, we will put in the description, we will also put the link to the 1967 Pentagon study that determined that if Judea Samaria, and that's a secret study, it was not done to share it with Israel. It was a secret study that was declassified many years later. And that study established that if the enemies of Israel ever controlled Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, Israel would be destroyed. Okay? That's very, very important. It's a very, very important study, because the Pentagon is the world's top authority on military questions. And they determined that Israel had to keep Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, or it would be destroyed. And then those same people, the Pentagon and the CIA, invented the PLO process, the Oslo process, to get the PLO into Israel, PLO Fatah.
And surprise, it was the same territories.
Same territories,
yeah.
Same territory, right?
Yeah.
So the argument this makes is that the Oslo process is an attack against Israel. Once you understand this, you know the world is upside down, because this was sold to people by people who knew what they were doing, because the intelligence agencies know everything I know. They know everything I know. So this was sold to the world by people who knew better as a peace process. They claimed that this would bring peace, when this is in fact the way to prepare the next genocide. And that is why my book, the title of my book translated to English, is The Collapse of the West, the Next Holocaust and Its Consequences. Because what I predicted in that book is that a new Holocaust was coming in the 21st century, and that it would happen in Israel. And that Holocaust actually began on October 7th, 2023, and it is still running. The only question now is if we're going to stop it. So I hope this video is useful for people to understand better what the Oslo process is, and I hope it's a useful tool for people to engage in conversation and try to get other people to think more clearly about what is going on. Because what the Oslo process demonstrates, once you understand its true history, is that the US bosses, the people running the United States, are not friends of the Israeli Jews. They're the worst enemies of the Israeli Jews. Okay? And one of the things the Oslo process did, there are many things we could say, but one of the things the Oslo process did is that it made it kosher for the CIA to directly train the PLO Fatah terrorists. Okay? Right after the Oslo agreements were signed, the CIA in public started training the PLO Fatah terrorists, because the narrative was that the Nazis in the CIA were, nobody knows that they're the Nazis, right? This has also been suppressed. But the Nazis in the CIA now had political cover to go train the terrorists in the PLO. To do what? To kill Jews. And that's what they've been doing ever since. The PLO, which is supposed to be the good guys, right? The partner for peace and all this stuff. Hamas is supposed to be the really crazy guys. But they tell you that PLO Fatah is the partner for peace. But forgive me, PLO Fatah, in the territories they control in Judea and Samaria, they have something called the Pay for Slay program. And the Pay for Slay program, what it does is it pays people, it pays Arab Palestinians to kill Jews. Anybody who kills a Jew, any Arab Palestinian who kills a Jew, gets a lifetime salary from the Palestinian Authority, which is the new name they gave to PLO Fatah, right? They get a lifetime salary, and if they die in the attempt, the salary goes to their family. So obviously, this is an organization that is dedicated to killing Jews. Case closed. Case closed. All right, so are there any questions from the 3 people who are listening to this live podcast?
Let me see. Okay, there's a question. It's not very related to this topic, but they say, do you think Trump is an eugenicist?
Oh, it's completely related to this topic because
Okay.
What explains the fact that the CIA was created absorbing the Nazi intelligence infrastructure is that the US bosses were eugenicists from even before the war, right? So even before the war, that's a whole other topic that we have explained here. But the people running the US were also running the international eugenics movement, and they in fact created German Nazism, and that explains why they absorbed the Nazis after the war. So after the war, in the post-war, they've continued with their eugenicists, pro-Nazi, anti-Jewish policies, and of course, they don't allow anybody to become president who is not a servant of that ideology. So of course, Trump is a eugenicist. And when you look at the policies of Donald Trump in the Middle East, it's perfectly obvious that he's trying to assist the Arab Muslims to produce the next Holocaust. It's obvious. He engineered the defeat of Israel on all of the fronts that Israel was fighting. He stopped them in Lebanon, stopped them in Syria, stopped them in Gaza, stopped them in Iran. He is strengthening Saudi Arabia. He is strengthening Hezbollah in Lebanon. He is protecting Qatar with NATO-level protection. Qatar is the country that attacked Israel on October 7th, etc. So obviously, I guess it's not obvious to everyone, but it's obvious to anyone who looks at the objective facts instead of the narrative apologies, right? To anybody who looks at the objective facts, it's obvious that Donald Trump has been pursuing a radically anti-Israeli policy. And we're going to have a very thorough analysis of all of that published on our Substack very soon. And it'll be part of the publication of the second edition of The Collapse of the West. So you can look forward to that in our Substack very, very soon, perhaps as early as next week. I hope to have it finished. And it'll be a very exciting document. Well, it's going to be a terrifying document, but it'll be very exciting for people who really want to get a better grip on our recent history, because the history we've been learning in school is a complete fraud. Amazing. Is there anything else?
No. No, we can't end it here.
All right. So everybody, please remember to subscribe, give us a like, because it really helps us reach more people. And we need to grow our English language podcast. So all 3 or 4 people who are listening to this podcast, get to work, man. Get to work advertising this podcast, because it's fantastic. And we have a lot of English material on our YouTube channel already for people to consume. It has a lot of stuff in it already. And we have these documentaries. We have 3 very good documentaries. We're going to put them in the description. Make sure you check them out. See you in the next one.
Thank you. See you.